Thus, man-machine combination will find a dividing line passing gradually from man over to machine, the machine taking more and more of the burden as we learn how to use the machines and as the machines become more powerful.
We're talking about knowledge and not numbers in the traditional sense. But we're also talking about a much more subtle kind of knowledge, which we call the heuristic knowledge of a field, the experiential knowledge, the non-rigorous knowledge. George Polya, the great Stanford mathematician, in popularizing this in the 50s, called heuristic reasoning the art of good guessing. And we'd like to invest computers with the art of good guessing.
What all of AI is about enhancing the capabilities of the human being. Intelligence amplifier is the phrase that has been used. The question is, what are the kinds of things we as a community can do that will make each of us 10 times, 100 times more effective than in the things that we need to do and we want to do than we can physically be given our human capabilities.
If 50 years ago computer scientists were reluctant to attribute human qualities to machines, hesitating, for example, to use expressions such the algorithm thinks or my program decided. Today it is rare not to attribute computational qualities to human thoughts. The ruling paradigm today in cognitive psychology has become, I compute, therefore I understand.
Okay.
And that is an absolutely perfect roll into our next panel on human-machine intelligence. And leading the panel is Barbara Grosz, who's the Higgins Professor of Natural Science in the School of Engineering at Harvard. So please welcome Barbara to the podium.
Thank you, Paul. As we've heard, Alan Turing's paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, appeared in 1950. It appeared in the journal Mind, a quarterly review of psychology and philosophy, setting a stage already that computer science connected to other fields. At the time, as actually we heard from Kelly Gottlieb earlier, many people were asking the question, can machines think? So from the very infancy of computing machinery, this question was on people's minds. Alan Turing proposes to replace that question with another question, which is, are there imaginable digital computers which would do well in a game he called the imitation game, and we all know as the Turing Test? He thus replaces a philosophical question with an operational one. Could a computer system be designed that would be able to carry on a dialogue ranging over any topic whatsoever, and perhaps many topics, that would be indistinguishable from a person? This challenge has yet to be met, and the relevance of the Turing Test itself to establishing intelligence of machinery is debatable. I would remark that Turing took thinking and intelligence to be synonymous. There's another quote in that paper, and you can actually find it on the back of your program booklets, that I want to focus on, and that's the following. He says, at the end of the century, the uses of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. This state of affairs has come to be. Research in artificial intelligence, AI, also known as machine intelligence, has generated a variety of algorithms and techniques regularly deployed in systems that enable them to behave in ways that are broadly considered intelligent. The participants in this panel have played essential roles in making this the case. Through their research, their advising of students, and their organizational leadership, they have enabled and spurred progress in AI. I want to note also that while Alan Turing's scientific work was stunning in its scope and brilliance, his early death was a sad commentary on a lack of humanity at a societal level. It's notable that even as our panelists have been immersed in their extraordinary achievements, they have also displayed, each in their own way, a sensitivity to humanity, and an impulse to do things to improve the world. In introducing them, I will speak briefly. You have longer biographies, but I'll emphasize both parts of their contributions. Our first two speakers, Ed Feigenbaum and Raj Reddy, received the Turing Award in 1994 jointly, and I quote, for pioneering the design and construction of large-scale artificial intelligence systems, demonstrating the practical importance and potential commercial impact of artificial intelligence technology. Individually in their research and often jointly in their leadership activities, they played seminal roles in spurring efforts to develop deployed AI systems. They have contributed to computer science also through technical and organizational leadership and as spokespeople for the field internationally. Ed, who will speak first, is Kumagai Professor of Computer Science Emeritus at Stanford University, where he founded and was co-scientific director of the Knowledge Systems Laboratory and co-principal investigator of the first national computer facility for applications of AI to medicine and biology. Ed's early research focused on cognitive modeling. Decision trees, which are still used extensively in machine learning research, first appeared, albeit under a different name, in this work. Ed is best known, however, as the father of expert systems. Before his work on Dendral, most work in AI had focused on formal reasoning methods. Ed shifted the emphasis to knowledge, and you heard some of that in the pre-session video. It's a shift that has been crucially important to deployed AI systems. Ed's slogan, "Knowledge is power," applies not only to building an expertise, but also to learning from large numbers of examples. In addition, from the earliest days, Ed has been passionate about developing AI talent and encouraging innovative high-risk research. Royalties from the book Computers in Thought, which was highly influential and perhaps the first AI textbook, initially funded what is now known as the Computers in Thought Award, the IJCAI Computers in Thought Award. It recognizes outstanding young scientists and is meant to look especially to encourage them to tackle important challenges. Ed was also instrumental in establishing the ACM AAAI Alan Newell Award. Ed.
Thanks, Barbara. Barbara, thanks for that generous introduction, and also thanks to the first panel for giving just a perfect lead-in for the few remarks that I have to make. I will spend the first 2 minutes of my precious 5 that my chairperson gave me, my so-called elevator speech, on the Alan Turing of the 1940s, culminating in the famous paper on AI in 1950. Then I'll spend the final precious minutes barely mentioning 2 lines of thinking about AI, lines that I call spectra. I hope that these can be discussed in the panel that follows. Now, in my Turing Award lecture in 1995, I recounted the extraordinary speech that Alan Turing gives in 1953 to the young boys at his old grammar school, as you heard, the Sherborne School. And this was told in the play Breaking the Code, based on the Turing biography by Hodges that you heard about. So here I'm going to quote from myself in the Turing Award lecture, and then I'm going to quote from Breaking the Code. Here's quoting myself. I remember vividly seeing this play in London. It was the most emotional experience I have ever had in the theater. I see and hear Turing delivering ideas to which I have dedicated my entire professional life and thought. So I am transported back in time to visit with my intellectual grandparent, hearing him talk about what my work would be. So here's Act 2, Scene 1. This is Turing speaking to the boys. People assume that computers are just glorified calculating machines. Not so. It's true that computers are often used to do calculating, because they can calculate very quickly. But computer programs don't have to have anything to do with numbers. A computer is a universal machine, and I have proved how it can perform any task that can be described in symbols. I would go further. It is my view that a computer can perform any task that the human brain can carry out. Any task. Turing then speaks of learning programs and of chess-playing programs. He continues, the question thus arises as to whether or not we would credit such a machine with intelligence. I would say that we must. Amazingly, Turing conceived this vision in the early 1940s during World War II at Bletchley Park. How do we know that? A young man working in Turing's hut later became a great British AI pioneer, Donald Mickey. You've heard his name earlier today. Professor Mickey said in an oral history, is the mic working? Here's Mickey speaking in his oral history. During the war, I had a lot of discussions with Turing that used to take place once a week. We used to play chess in the pub. For Turing, automating game playing as a testing ground for artificial intelligence was very central. That was how I got to know Turing so well. Mickey then goes on to describe Turing's actual chess programming efforts, which didn't get far for various reasons, one of which actually came up in the panel but was not explicit. It was Kilburn wouldn't give him any time during the day. He had to work at night. They didn't get along. I can discuss all this later in the panel if people are interested. For me, the most important thing that Turing did for AI science in this early period, Barbara's already mentioned it, specifically in the paper that proposes the imitation game now called the Turing Test, is this. He convincingly argues for a behavioral definition of intelligence, not one based on arguments of religion, philosophy, consciousness, or even the mental straitjacket of a famous programmer, the 19th century Lady Lovelace. Intelligence is as intelligence does. This is the empirical view that has guided most of the successes of AI, from Newell and Simon's logic theorist, through speech understanding, expert systems, robotics, all the way to the present day, Watson and Siri. Turing's 1950 paper, just to quote our chair here, Barbara, has said about it last month, a truly astonishing paper, a paper for the century. Now I'd like to talk about the two spectra that I mentioned. The first one of these I call the spectrum of behaviors. What does AI work on? And the second one I call the knowledge versus search spectrum. Where lies the power of AI techniques? First, the AI field studies, models, and ultimately builds artifacts across a huge spectrum that constitutes intelligent, cognitive, and perceptual behaviors. One extremum of the spectrum is the sensory end, where AI merges with signal processing, interpreting sensory signals that other processes use for constructing higher levels of understanding. For example, speech waveforms, camera images, motor feedback. At the other extreme are the highly prized cognitive behaviors involving knowledge and reasoning. For example, theory formation, mathematical reasoning, chess play, art making, reading science textbooks with understanding followed by answering questions about the content, a grand challenge that Raj Reddy once set for the AI field in 2003. In between lie all the other behaviors that we associate with the term cognition. Language understanding, learning from experience, inferring the intent of other actors, planning a goal-directed sequence of acts, and everything else. Almost all of which involve stored knowledge representations of various kinds.
Sometimes the so-called integrated AI systems are developed that draw on points across the whole spectrum, yielding remarkable results, like driverless cars in urban environments and personal assistants in the pocket computer that you call your smartphone. Second, the knowledge versus search spectrum. The behaviors just mentioned are achieved at one end of the spectrum by a large body of knowledge being brought to bear, usually with great domain specificity or task specificity, but not necessarily so. Remember, this is a spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is dominated by massive amounts of search in huge combinatorial spaces, the so-called problem spaces. Usually, behaviors that depend on search are intractable for all the obvious reasons. So a small amount of knowledge is used to control the search. But again, remember, this is a spectrum, so there will always be a mixture of knowledge and search. In the first decade of AI research, studies of the search end of the spectrum dominated. The second decade, as Barbara mentioned, saw what has been called, and I'm quoting two people from MIT, the shift to the knowledge-based paradigm. In the knowledge lies the power. Usually, little search is needed. That is why AI scientists rarely apply for time on supercomputers at the great supercomputer centers. But there are noticeably important experimental results at the search end of this spectrum that need exploration. If much knowledge can be combined with much search, I predict some rather remarkable behaviors will result. They will be new to mankind. So to bring this talk full circle, Turing and the codebreakers in his hut knew all this. Even with massive search assisted by the electromechanical bomb machines and the electronic Colossus computers, there was no hope of breaking the German codes without knowledge of the German coding machines, knowledge of how they were being used on a daily basis, knowledge of the statistics of the words of the German language, and so on. And of course, the integration of the knowledge and search with human intelligence in a tightly coupled man-machine intelligence system. It is said that this shortened World War II by at least 6 months and perhaps as much as 2 years. Alan Turing, happy birthday. The AI community salutes you, and the community of mankind salutes you.
Thank you. Raj Reddy, who will speak next, is the Moza bint Nasser University Professor of Computer Science and Robotics in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. He founded and for many years led CMU's Robotics Institute. Raj is perhaps most well known for his pioneering contributions to continuous speech recognition systems. The speech systems you all know, pervasive in the devices you use today, deploy many techniques that Raj and his students pioneered in addressing challenges such as large vocabulary and speaker-independent speech recognition and unrestricted vocabulary dictation. Their Blackboard model for bringing together multiple knowledge sources is deployed widely in a variety of applied AI systems. Raj also made seminal contributions to work on task-oriented architectures, interpreting natural scenes, and autonomous robotic systems. He helped initiate nationwide research programs in VLSI, sensor networks, and user interfaces. Recently, he has been very active in promoting efforts on universal digital libraries. Raj has used his accomplishments and his stature to address societal needs and to bring the advantages of technology to the developing world. To mention just two of many such efforts, he helped found and is the chancellor of the Rajiv Gandhi University of Knowledge Technologies, which caters to the educational needs of gifted rural youth. And he serves on the International Board of Governors of the Paris Center for Peace, based in Israel. Raj.
Good morning. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here among so many eminent scientists and friends who we have shared 50 years of scientific progress together in our field. Our dear departed friend and colleague, Jim Gray, in his Turing Award lecture, proposed a modern vision of Turing's imitation game. He suggested if a system is to be considered intelligent, it should hear as well as a native speaker, it should speak as well as a native speaker, and it should see as well as a person and recognize objects and behavior. This is a very interesting definition of intelligence because every man, woman, and child on the planet possess these abilities. Not everybody can prove theorems or play chess, but they can all speak, hear, and see. If we can't even do that, then trying to do the more abstract, complex things seems futile. The last 50 years, many of us have been trying to do some of these things, hear, speak, and see, and it has proved to be very difficult. However, there have been some dramatic advances in the last decade, which I was extremely happy to see, on the problems of speech and language understanding. Last year's release of Apple iPhone with Siri spoken language understanding systems represents a landmark event. Prior to this event, it was broadly believed by those of us in research in speech understanding systems that recognition of unrehearsed, spontaneous speech in uncontrolled environments is nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. While similar systems were demonstrated in the 1950s in the academic laboratories, but used by open population was known to be a several orders of magnitude complex problem. And finally, we have a solution to it. And when I look deep into this solution, I don't see a concise and elegant paradigm of intelligence. What I see is a brute force approach. And as I will say a little later, that may be the nature of intelligence. But I'll come back to that. The other dramatic improvements previously thought to be decades away are the Google any language to any language translation systems that are routinely available today. We knew they were impossible to do, but they're being done. I think we should rejoice in that result. IBM's Watson answering system on answering questions on Jeopardy was just breathtaking to see, for me anyway, having lived through 50 years of difficult aspects of such problems. But all of them seem to use brute force. Now this leads me to Turing's second suggestion in his landmark paper. He says we should, rather than building an adult machine, he says we should build a child machine and educate it and figure out how to educate it. Right? McCarthy in his paper, The Well-Designed Child, and Minsky in his two books, The Society of Minds and The Emotion Machine, make several important suggestions on the attributes and properties of such a machine, but not at a level a computer architect might do. The problem we face to build a child machine is what is innate and what has to be taught. In the innate part of the machine, we are given, there may be as many as 100 million computational elements, each with 1 million neurons working together to recognize or do something. And these 100 million computational elements are connected by 100 million wires, pre-connected, pre-wired. We haven't yet started thinking about how to build such machines, although the cloud computing with millions of computational elements come close, but not close enough. We're at 1% point. And I think it's a very interesting research challenge which we might want to look at. The task of deciding on the architecture of a child machine has some necessary conditions. After 6 months of exposing to the sensory data with no education whatsoever, a 6-month-old child machine should be able to smile when exposed to a familiar face in the visual field. After 10 months of exposure to sounds in the environment, it should be able to recognize and utter sounds, common sounds like ma and pa. And it should have built-in mechanisms for signal processing and image processing, which reduces the data bandwidth by factors of 100 or 1,000, and have built-in mechanisms for learning automatically, self-adapting computation elements. My proposal is we should embrace Turing's suggestion by first trying to create a child machine that has the abilities of every man, woman, and child on the planet, literate or not, instead of trying to produce a program to simulate the adult mind, as Turing said, with intellectual capabilities of highly educated individuals. If we can create a child machine which can see, hear, and speak as well as a 4-year-old by educating it, we can probably educate it to do everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Finally, we'll hear from Judea Pearl, who is Professor of Computer Science and Statistics and Director of the Cognitive Systems Laboratory at UCLA. Judea, the recipient of this year's Turing Award, is being recognized for fundamental contributions to artificial intelligence through the development of a calculus for probabilistic and causal reasoning. Before Judea invented Bayesian networks, which are probability models defined by directed acyclic graphs, probabilistic approaches to AI were thought to be intractable, requiring essentially an exponentially large set of parameters. Judea argued that sound probabilistic analysis of a problem would give intuitively correct results where rule-based systems failed. In order to contribute to our being able to do this, along with Bayesian networks, he defined an exact linear time inference algorithm for belief propagation, enabling efficient inference on these models. He subsequently has expanded this work to provide a mathematical framework for causal inference. The probabilistic work, which is expounded in the book Probabilistic Reasoning in Intelligent Systems, revolutionized AI. It's become an important tool as well in various other branches of science and engineering. And Judea's causal models have had significant impact in the social sciences. Pearl emerged from a very public, personal tragedy, committed passionately to another cause. After his son's kidnapping and murder, he and his wife established the Daniel Pearl Foundation to further cross-cultural understanding and to increase tolerance and humanity through journalism, music, which he also is involved in, and innovative communications. Judea.
Thank you for having me on this panel. I'll be brief and I'll just re-congratulate Alan Turing for his birthday, and I'll say a few words about how he affected my life and my career. One element that was not sufficiently emphasized by other speakers about Alan Turing was his honesty. By that I mean that he had the courage in the early 1950s to articulate in a scientific journal what other people kept inside, namely that the quest of many of his colleagues and many of the computer scientists in his time, their quest for making machines originated from the quest to understand themselves. I find it among many of my students that come to computer science just to make machine more powerful, but when you speak to them eye to eye, you find out that their real motivation is to understand themselves. And what is better to understanding ourselves than to emulate ourselves in a machine? Because once you emulate yourself in a machine, you can take it apart and see how it acts with that wheel or without that wheel. And that's what understanding is all about, to take things apart and put it together again. Now, we talked about the Turing effect on computer science a lot, and I want to mention two other effects that perhaps were not sufficiently emphasized. One is when you have this curiosity and inspiration to emulate yourself, there are fallouts. The fallouts are technological, and they appear also in two other areas. So I will just demonstrate it from my small and narrow perspective. You start with a dilemma. How come people do it and machines don't do it yet? Okay. And that is has a tremendous inspirational power because you have an existence proof. It can be done. It is done today by organic machines, but it's still machine. And that is a tremendous, if anyone that tries to prove the theorems, knowing that it can be proven, it's a very encouraging piece of knowledge. So that is one thing, that you have an existence proof, actually you have billions of existence proofs, and the question is only how to do it. And by learning how to do it, you have fallouts. The fallouts are translated to areas which we have never imagined or never predicted. In my case, the question of how people handle uncertainty translated into a variety of applications from homeland security to genetic consulting to some people tell me that the Google driverless car is using Bayesian network. I didn't, of course, imagine that. So you have this technological fallout that starts with a philosophical question. How can we do it? And machines don't do it yet. Then there's the second fallout. And the fallout is a reflection back on cognitive science. Once you learn what can and cannot be done, and what must be assumed in order to make things happen, this creates a theory of cognition. And you come back to the psychologist and tell you, forget it. Your theory is wrong because it cannot possibly be explained. The speed and reliability by which people do it cannot be explained until you assume a certain architecture. So here come architectures such as PDP and others, feeding back from computer science to the cognitive science. And I want to talk about a third fallout, which I haven't heard at all, at least in my circles. And this is the influence of computer science disciplines on other areas of science. Other areas, I mean, you have 100,000, maybe millions scientists working every day, getting salaries, writing grants, exploring the effect of drugs on diseases, and so on. And you'll be surprised how aimlessly they are doing their everyday job. And you'll be surprised, for instance, that sciences such as statistics, epidemiology, econometrics did not develop notation to write down even the simple statements that the rooster crow does not cause the sun to rise. It's a simple statement that you and I believe in, and there's no mathematical language to write this simple sentence in. So here I'm talking about transferring the disciplines with which we are familiar in computer science, namely notation, semantics, syntactics rules, theory axiomatization, theorem proving, back to the everyday conduct of science. And in this area, I can mention, from my narrow perspective, the advancement that we made in causal reasoning. Today, we know what should have been known to mankind already 150 years ago. Okay? What assumptions one must make before one can find out cause-effect relationship from experimental and non-experimental observations. Okay? What can be identified and what cannot. How counterfactual can be processed, and more importantly, how to articulate one's assumptions, and whether a certain theory has some statistical implications, so you can test the theory, refute it. So all this has advanced as a fallout of a curious question. If people do it, why shouldn't the machine? So, thank you.
So our fourth panelist, Marvin Minsky, was unable to come to San Francisco today. As I assume most of you know, Marvin was in at the very beginning of AI efforts in the United States. He co-founded the MIT AI Lab, and he's made major contributions to almost every area of artificial intelligence. He sends his greetings, special greetings to all his friends here. He also sent a few thoughts, which I wanted to share with you. First, he noted how we are usually unaware of how much of what we do today is based on concepts developed by Turing and others in the mid-20th century. He says he doesn't have anything to add to discussing the many things Turing did in his brief life. And I'm quoting, except perhaps to express how much I treasure the memories of having been involved in so many later developments. He also goes on to highlight early contributions of four other pioneers of computer science who crossed paths with each other and with Turing. And I think this is interesting in light of the previous panel, debating and dreaming about what computing machines might do and what brains did do. The three people he mentions are Claude Shannon, who published the landmark Mathematical Theory of Communications in 1948, Warren McCulloch, who with Walter Pitts in 1943 published A Logical Calculus of How Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity, which describes some first attempts to show how simple logical modules could support mind-like processes, and John von Neumann, who in the 40s set out to design machines that could build copies of themselves, and who, along with McCulloch, developed new ideas about how to make reliable machines from unreliable components. So at the time all of these people were meeting together and gabbing in a slightly less formal setting than we're in, the idea of machines thinking was in the air. I thought I would turn first, while we're collecting questions, to ask our panelists what's in the air today. How do the ability now to have a lot of data and analyze a lot of data, how do advances in the brain sciences change your thinking, for example, Raj, about learning and building the child machine? Or your questions, Ed, about what's reasoning and what's knowledge, or Judea, the role of causal thinking. So anybody can start.
In the last decade, there have been a lot of advances in brain science and understanding of the physical structure and realities of the brain. The thing that surprised me was there were 100,000 miles of wire in the brain. And the white matter that it represents occupies about 50% of the brain. Knowing what we know about wires in semiconductor circuits, that's not surprising to me, but nevertheless it was interesting. There's a lot of communication going on between all these computational elements. The question was, what are they communicating? How are they communicating? What is it that they need to communicate to create the intelligence? These are fascinating questions. We don't have the answers, but I think in addition to working with cognitive science and computer science like Newell and Simon tried to do, I think many of us should keep an eye on what advances are happening in brain science so that it might inform us on the kind of future architectures that might be interesting.
Ed?
I have a couple things I wanted to say, but Raj just provoked me. All along in the work in AI science, I say all along, I mean up till the middle of this decade, the previous first decade of the 21st century, AI people were working on the mind, not the brain. Working on the brain is a wonderful scientific topic, but doing it with the techniques that were present that were the only techniques that were useful up until near present, was like sticking probes into a big computer and looking at signals and thinking you can make sense of the behavior of the computer by sticking probes into it. What was needed was multiple levels of abstraction between activities down at the brain level, where neurons and synapses and chemistry is doing something, and the level at which information is being processed. Newell and Simon wrote what I would call probably the greatest book on thinking in the 20th century, called Human Problem Solving. And they pushed their analysis down to only the level of what they called EIPs, elementary information processes. And physicists and other scientists are accustomed to having multiple levels of abstraction. You don't try to explain certain macro phenomena by going all the way down to quarks and gluons. There are very many levels of abstraction between. It seems like it's impossible to talk the neuroscientists into that point of view. They just, and also the AI people who think they're doing brain science, they want to go right down into the brain. Well, that's virtually impossible.
Judea?
I want to touch on the first challenge that you mentioned, that's the big data. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I think that AI will play an immense role in this endeavor, because when you have a big data, you need to decompose it to its stable components. And that's where AI, and in particular the causal models that have been developed recently, should play an immense role. In the big data industry, you are trying to collect results of experiments from hundreds, maybe thousands of hospitals to come out with a coherent theory of what's good for every patient. And a patient needs to be identified by its characteristics and be related to other patients that have been seen before. And when you are dealing with such a huge amount of data, you need to decompose it into its stable component. And that's where causal reasoning and the AI and articulation and expression of these models can come into. I think it cannot be done without this decomposition technique.
Thank you. There's a note here that someone sadly missing from this panel who passed away recently, so let me mention that we're all sad that John McCarthy, who was a key figure and founder of artificial intelligence, is not here, as well as a Turing Award winner, missed by very few months being with us today. And thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Here's a question directed at you, Judea, but I'm going to try and broaden it so that others can comment. Experience is a very important kind of knowledge for guiding, searching, and thinking, but it is often ambiguous and sometimes implicit. How do you think about working from experience? And in order to, and representing and reasoning from experiences, but let me try and broaden this question and push on Raj a little bit. We know that infants learn from interactions with others. It's not simply that they're out in the world on their own, that emotions play, this is really a question for Ed, I think emotions play a role also in thinking. So can you comment on things beyond the logical and the factual that we've tackled so much in AI, and comment on, looking forward, what we might be doing to encompass those kinds of aspects of thinking? Yeah. Why don't we let Judea start?
I normally answer the question about emotion by saying that these are the easiest things to emulate. When the machine goes crazy and you have signals going all over the place and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, you say the machine has overreacted emotionally. So I don't think, and as we talked yesterday, emotion, I think, can be formalized as a spontaneous inhibition of certain software modules and rearrangement of their priority among software modules that is delegated to chemical machine, okay? Involuntarily. Okay? So I don't think it's a big puzzle.
So just to push back a little bit on the joke, Herb Simon in his William James lectures conjectures that we should think about emotions because they might control reasoning. You've just mentioned that. I have a student who just finished a thesis in which he uses emotions to reprioritize goals in a multi-agent setting and shows that those agents actually behave better when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of dynamic change in the world. So, Raj or Ed?
So there was a statement about experience providing us the ability to reason. I think another way of looking at it is experience essentially permits us to transfer reason into recognition. There are a lot of things we instantaneously recognize because all of the reasoning has already been done, and it's then stored as a recognition memory. All the things we do instantaneously, like recognize faces, it is now known through various experiments that have been done in cognitive psychology that there is probably an area that recognizes your father and your mother and your siblings, separate, customized computational ability. And so my suspicion is lots of things we do don't involve reasoning at all. It's all instantaneous recognition. Occasionally, when we do need to do reason, it's probably shallow reasoning, just to kind of connect the dots. And very few times, like when you're trying to prove a new theorem or something, then you sit and cogitate for a whole day before you come up with a proof. I think that is my perspective.
Raj just gave most of the answer that I would have given, but I'll just link it a little bit to what I said in my 5-minute elevator speech, and also to a recent book. I talked about the knowledge versus search spectrum and said that most of the work in AI had been at the knowledge end of that spectrum, but typically that was highly professional knowledge, medical, geological, engineering knowledge, and so on. But I'm coming to believe more and more and more, and in fact, you're going to ask later, what would I do with the rest of my career if I had another one? I would work at pushing the knowledge end of that spectrum much, much further. That is, almost everything that constitutes human behavior is stored in there and retrieved by what Raj called a recognition process. Almost none of it is done by by reasoning except in a very shallow way from what the linguists, computational linguists call textual inference. That's a radical position, but it's not radical when you think that the billions of examples that we have running around the world are machines that are 100 millisecond machines. Not a nanosecond, not a microsecond, 100 millisecond machines, but they have enormous storage. If you were a machine like that, how would you then how would you do your work around the world? You'd store a heck of a lot. And then I finally just want to say that recognition versus real deep reasoning, it was brought up by the Nobel Prize winner Kahneman, the psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics, in a recent book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And the thinking fast is the recognition. So he calls system 1 and system 2. But when you really sit down to think about something, like a scientific problem or a medical diagnosis or something, then you're in system 2, which is really slow.
Judea? I just want to add that when you talk about experience, you have to distinguish between passive observations and active learning. In active learning, you manipulate the world and see its reaction. In passive learning, just sit there and observe. Okay? And we have today a theory that distinguishes between the two and takes advantage of the symbiosis between two modes of learning or interacting and learning from experience. Yeah. As far as the spectrum between knowledge and search, it's a very fluid kind of spectrum. We learn by taking truths that were derived by reasoning and storing them explicitly and reusing them. So this exercise of learning by reasoning is very useful, and it has to be also very little of it was implemented. For instance, reasoning by analogy, or even what expertise. What is expert system? What is reason by analogy? Analogy is you have a similarity that were accumulated by explicitly storing a piece of expert system in your mind, and those expert systems were developed slowly in the course of learning. So I don't see the dichotomy between the knowledge end and the reasoning end to be that sharp. It's constantly moving, the frontier constantly moving from one to another.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave there are two components. One is how do you learn, and then second is how do you recognize. There are many things we take a lot of time to learn. Learning is a slow process. It involves a lot of reasoning, a lot of understanding. Once you learn it, you dedicate a piece of your memory permanently to it. And so things that are familiar, you recognize instantaneously. If you see a face you have never seen before, that requires a lot of reasoning and understanding and perhaps many times viewing it and then learning. So learning is a very complex, independent process. Recognition, performance afterwards can be instantaneous.
Barbara, I just want to add a comment about psychology. That, as you all know, the AI field unfolded partly as information processing psychology and partly as artificial intelligence engineering viewpoint. And one of the great practitioners on the psychology side was Herb Simon. So, and he was inclined to do experiments when he was very empirically minded. And when he got intrigued with the work we were doing on expert systems, he wanted to see what was the nature of human expertise. So he and a group of people that he got, Jill Larkin and others, did some experiments on expertise, and it sort of unleashed a lot of work in the field of psychology, which has recently been collected into the Cambridge University Press's Handbook of Expertise. And that's where the numbers that you hear floating around, in Herb Simon's case, he called it 10 years of work to become an expert, but That was changed by Gladwell into 10,000 hours of work, and it correlates very well with what the master-apprentice system in Japan views the transition time from apprentice to master, or what it happened in medieval times. And if you add up the years it takes to become a practicing MD, it's about 10 years or so. Now, what is going on in those 10 years? It's accumulating a vast amount of these examples that will be pulled out of memory when you see them. But if you try to, like, some of you are pianists. Imagine that you're trying to play something and think about it. If you do, you can't do it. Or if you're an ice skater, you can't skate if you think about it. Or if you're an NFL pro quarterback, you don't think about what's unfolding on the field when you only have 3 seconds to get that pass off.
So I want to give Judea, do you want a 30-second riposte, or shall we move to the next question? So there are many questions in here which you've already answered, and many wonderful questions we won't get to. There are 2 more questions I want to ask before our time is up. What's fundamentally missing in computer architecture, including parallel processing, whatever you want to include? And I might broaden this from just what's missing in computer science outside of AI that is important for building an intelligent machine, whether a child machine or another kind of machine. So there's a whole audience here of people who might be looking for new research problems. Do you have anything you'd like them to do?
I can start.
Raj.
So one of the things that fascinated me when I looked at the human computational elements, they seem to self-organize and self-learn and self-program themselves. We have FPGAs. Some people have tried to get them to, through genetic programming, to self-program. We don't have any computation elements that can learn to program themselves from experience. I think that's a good, interesting research problem. When it comes to learning, I may just, there are lots of things a human system does that we yet don't have computers that can do it. To have, if can I correct the output of a system and say, this is wrong, do it this way? We don't know how to build those systems. We don't know how to acquire, use, recognize, and generate speech and language. There are lots of things like that.
Ask you to pause here because we're running out of time, and I want to give Ed and Judea a chance to answer.
For myself, I mean, I could give a number of examples, but like you say, we're running out of time. If I had had the time in my elevator speech, I would have introduced a third spectrum called the what to how spectrum. Right. And most of computer science and information technology is concerned with operating more on the how end of the what to how spectrum than the what end. I would like to see the people called HCI people, human-computer interface people, design interfaces that operate at the what end of the spectrum. As a human being, I just want to tell it what it is I want to accomplish. Let it set up goal-directed behavior. Let it know the manual for my phone, or it should know all of that stuff, and I don't need to know it. But the HCI people don't do that, except for Siri.
No, I have nothing to add to that.
So in our remaining time, I want to give each of you a minute to respond to the following, and Ed kind of presaged this. In your work from the earliest days, you took high risks, you had bold visions. For the students in the audience and others, imagine that you were just starting your careers now. What's the problem you would take on? So.
Well, I will. First of all, I want to mention that there would be 2, and I've already given you one before. But the second one would be the modeling of creativity. There are some, remember I said on the knowledge versus search spectrum that most of the points achieved by AI lie on the knowledge end of the spectrum. But there are some outlying points on the search end of the spectrum. One of them that came as a great shock was the absolutely brilliant move that Deep Blue made in the Kasparov chess game in, I think, game 3. Brilliant and deep move that was done by mostly search, not knowledge. There have been several other instances of that. In fact, even at the very beginning, when Newell and Simon were working on the logic theory program, on a machine called the Judea, which had 40,000 operations a second. Not 40 billion, just 40,000 operations a second. It was able to discover a proof to one of the theorems in Whitehead and Russell's chapter 2 that was much more elegant than Whitehead and Russell's proof. So I would like to use the immense power that we have now in computational power to do much more extensive searches. And I bring it down to...
You need to stop there so that Judea and Raj get their minute. You got a minute.
I would encourage students just to listen to their own curiosity and continue to ask the questions that Turing asked. How come we do that and we cannot do it on a machine? Specifically in my area, the thing that entices me today is the question of free will. We all understand that machine does not have free will. At the same time, we, machine like us, do have free will. And the question is, what can we gain by equipping machines with something that looks like they have a free will? And I think a lot of mileage could be obtained. Number one, from the theory of counterfactuals that was developed in the past. And number two, from collaborating and cooperating communities of robots and developing a social cohesiveness.
So, Raj, you get the last 50 seconds.
I've been working on trying to get all human knowledge encapsulated in books into digital libraries, scanning. Google has done a much better job in the last 5 years. So we have now 20 million books. If each of us read a book every day from the time you're born to the time you die, you can probably read about 40,000 books. There's all these other books, like 100 million books, which have a lot of knowledge. I personally don't have enough lifetimes to read them. So I'd like to build agents that will read those books, understand them, and whisper in my ear when a Siri-like question comes at me. It says, oh, the answer is this, so-and-so has it in a response. So I think it should be something that we can do in the next 50 years. We should try to do it because each of us must have the ability to encapsulate all the human knowledge and use it. And then we'll become superhuman.
And on that note, please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, Barbara, Raj, Ed, Yuda. That was spectacular. Yuda, I keep thinking, I don't know, I always have troubles with your first name like everybody does, but in a different way. I just keep wanting to call you Yoda. I don't know why. But anyway, thank you again.
That's a different process.